Hello ladies and gentlemen, in this lesson we'll talk about curriculum as a process. The first important thing to mention is that methodology is the enactment of curriculum. In other words, after we have analyzed the needs of the students and the situation in which they are, and we have established relevant purposes and goals, as well as measurable and concrete objectives, we arrive to the stage in which we have also established a syllabus based on all of the relevant content that is necessary for achieving the purpose of the program. So the next step is to set the methodology, and this is the most crucial step in the curriculum because this is the part in which we execute the plan. That means that we're going to implement the contents that we selected and we're going to make learning happen. Now, in order to explore and understand the importance of methodology, let's begin by reflect on the memorable learning experiences that we have had. And I have three questions for you. First one is, what is the best learning activity you participated in as a language learner in a classroom? The second one is, what is the worst or the most boring activity that you participated in? And finally, in your opinion, what is the best or the most effective methodology? So you will see that whatever your answers, the most memorable activities will be those in which you've had some kind of game or participated in an interactive activity, or you have done something that goes beyond the use of the textbooks and the traditional learning schemes. On the other hand, you will see that the worst and the most boring activities are those that involve following exactly the textbook and doing the activities that are there, focusing on the content, listening to grammar explanations, and so on. So about the third question, I think you will have a variety of answers and you will agree that this will depend on the kind of learning, on the purpose of the activity, and the reason of the learner for learning and practicing the language. And this is right. There is, of course, a wide array of language teaching methods and approaches that teachers can use. For example, grammar translation, audiolingual, direct method, community language learning, RACS method, Suggestopedia, the silent way, CBI and CLIL, total physical response, competency-based teaching, learning strategy training, the participatory approach, the natural approach, instructed second language acquisition, and the task-based approach, among others. Now, normally, sometimes the institution is going to have a particular method, but it is important that the teacher also knows how to, in a principled way, improvise and use different elements for each of these methods. This is that we call a principled eclecticism. The reason why it is important to talk about methodology and curriculum as a process is because there are normally two views of curriculum. The first one is the top-down, expert-driven approach in which the content and the teaching experiences are based on the theory. Normally we expect some products which are carefully stated in terms of outcomes, and we basically want the teachers to adapt and use exactly the same processes. That means that we look for uniformity. On the other hand, the process view of curriculum starts from the learners and the teacher in a bottom-up process, which is based, of course, on the practice. This means that the learners and the teachers will perform activities and learning experiences that are more directed towards the results of a concrete nature. It would also be based on the process in the sense that the important thing is to go through a series of activities in which the learners are going to interact, they're going to collaborate, they're going to find solutions to problems, and this interaction is more important than the language product itself. Finally, of course, a very important element in this process view of curriculum is creativity. That means that instead of looking for uniformity and following exactly the same procedures and the same techniques, we're going to use our own ideas, and depending on the group, we will select whatever is more appropriate in that moment. We must then be aware of the managerial market-based approach to language teaching and methodology. There is this McDonaldization, that's what I call it, of language teaching, in which we look to have exactly the same processes. That means that our institutions are going to establish some schemes of work that must be followed. Sometimes there will be ready-made lesson plans for everybody. They will probably force us to use some package methodologies that the institution advocates, and not to mention the textbooks and materials, which is a current practice. Every school and every institution has a series of textbooks that must be followed by the teachers. There could be sometimes observations in order to make sure that the processes are being respected, and probably evaluations for the teachers and tests for the learners. Now, this is the McDonaldization of teaching, and basically what I can say about it is that I'm hating it. Now, however, it is important to know that even though the objectives and the textbooks and the lesson plans are necessary and indispensable for the curriculum, there is a very important part that the teachers and the learners will play in the enactment of these contents. These are only the basis, like the skeleton of what must be done, but the bones, the flesh, the blood are going to be provided by the teachers in something that we call the lived or ecological curriculum. Now, if I read this quote by Kennedy, we will say that the lived or ecological curriculum is person-centered, and it considers the user's needs. It identifies problems rather than rushing to solutions, and does not rely on top-down mechanistic models, but is a process that works towards interaction between participants at all levels. So this means that instead of taking the letter and the contents exactly the way they are and following them to the letter, we're going to try to find the way in which these contents, in which these practices can be implemented in a way that will be meaningful for the learners. And of course, the teacher has a very important role in this type of curriculum. We must know that teachers bring a lot to the teaching process and to the curriculum. In a way, the teachers are the curriculum. They have personal knowledge and values and knowledge about the context and the learners. They will also be required to use all of the language ability in order to be a model and an example for learners, and they will also be trained in the content of the different courses and the content of language teaching, and they will be able to implement pedagogical effective practices that will involve most of the times knowledge of teaching methodology. It is very important that the teacher is very well trained in teaching methodology so that he or she can choose whatever method, technique, or approach is more effective for a particular group of learners in a particular moment. The teacher also has practical knowledge. That means that from his experience in the field, he will know exactly what works, what doesn't work, and finally, he will reflect on the experience in order to make the practice more effective and more adapted to the learner's needs. Now, let's look at an example. We normally have a syllabus to follow, and we have a textbook, and within the textbook and the content we have lesson plans for specific lessons. Let's look then at this example from Empower C1. This is a lesson, and when we look at it, there is content, and this content of course must be respected in the sense that there are specific objectives to be learned. For example, there is some specific vocabulary, some particular grammar instructions, there are some specific functions, and there are some reading strategies that must be taught. But the way that we implement this, the way that we bring it into life, is going to depend on the knowledge of the teacher and on his or her ability to personalize the content, to make it real for the students. So, the teacher will look at the content of the lesson or the textbook, and he will design a specific purpose for a lesson. So, the purpose could be to acquire aspects of the language, grammar, vocabulary, functions. It could also be to prepare learners for performance of a specific task, to improve fluency or accuracy, or sometimes even just to increase motivation in the students. Sometimes the purpose will be to show them how to do something or to apply previous learning, and some other times to learn new content, to practice an activity, or to review and consolidate previous knowledge. Sometimes the teacher may focus on developing a specific skill, or maybe he will want just the students to have a little fun in the classroom, to make them feel successful by means of achieving a task or completing a project. Sometimes he will want to prepare them for out-of-class language use, such as, fostering some competencies, or maybe to produce something using the language. The way in which these purposes are going to be implemented are by the use of different kinds of activities, such as exercises, performances, drills, tasks, or affective activities. Now, each of these have a different purpose. For example, the exercises are procedures to practice, review, or consolidate. Performances refer to demonstrations of language ability or use, such as songs or role plays. The drills involve controlled repetition or manipulation of language patterns in order to make them automatic. The tasks are activities that they do using the language in order to solve a problem or works towards a product. And finally, affective activities are those that are only used in order to boost the morale or the enthusiasm of the class. So even though the teacher has a lesson plan in which everything is carefully established, he or she will also have to engage in something that is called principled improvisation. Now, we need to know exactly when to flip the script. In other words, in what ways we are going to get off the road and work in a different direction of what the original plan established. These are situations in which we probably look to serve the common goal. That means that we're looking for new ways in order to make learning more easier or more enjoyable. It's sometimes because we will be teaching to the moment an opportunity has arisen in which it is meaningful to explore new vocabulary or talk about a new topic or to bring out a specific grammar content that is important for that moment. In some other cases, we will just want to expand on the lesson and take it a little further. Sometimes also our interventions will be important in order to help the students to learn at the same pace, to focus on some specific learners and make learning more egalitarian. Sometimes we want to promote the involvement of the students in the activities, or maybe simply accommodating to different kinds of learning styles. But in all of these cases, the teacher will implement new tasks that will be important in order to make learning more effective and more enjoyable in a given situation. Now, principal improvisation is not real improvisation, so this means that we do not change things in the curriculum or on the syllabus. The objectives must be achieved, the content must be covered, the objectives of the program must be respected, but what we're going to do is we're going to bring things into life by making them more enjoyable and more related to the learner's own experiences. So in order to engage in this principal improvisation, we need different kinds of elements. First of all, we must have solid professional qualifications. If we don't know about methodology, if we don't know about language, if we don't have the competence in order to know what principal changes we can make, we cannot improvise. The second thing, this improvisation must be based on observation of the students, reflection of what's going on, exploration of different alternatives, and then an evaluation to see if what we're doing is working, and then to see in which ways we can improve it. Another thing is collaboration. That means that we also have to focus on the learner and engage in negotiation, in a constant adaptation to the learner's needs and interests. Another thing is that we need to use this improvisation in order to build a community. The learners must feel part of the learning process. Another thing that is important to take into account is to foster the learner autonomy. We always need to empower the learner in order to, little by little, learn by him or herself. And the last and most important thing is to rethink our role as teachers. Instead of being instructors, people who are just dictating and explaining grammar rules, we may become facilitators and help the students to understand things without many explanations and more activities, more examples, more tasks that are meaningful. And also, instead of becoming technicians, just following a plan and repeating everything that is inside and going one activity after the other in the textbook, we must become creators. That means that the textbook and the lesson plans must only be some guidelines, some outlines for us to develop our creativity and achieve the objectives and cover the content in a way that is the most meaningful and most effective for our learners. So, this is what we call curriculum as a process. I would like you to review the methodology so that you know exactly when and how you can engage in principal eclecticism. Thanks a lot for your attention and see you next time.